Now that the Switch 2 has been unveiled, what kind of node shrink would you expect down the line for a prospective Switch 2 Lite, assuming the OG Switch 2 is on Samsung 8nm, which it most likely is? Also, what quality of life improvements would you like to see on a future OLED model? I like this question because we haven't even gone hands-on with the first one yet, with the model we're going to get in June, and we're already looking forward to the refresh. So in terms of quality of life improvements, well, we would like to see an OLED model based on the footage we've seen from the hands-on, right? I mean, OLED's just awesome. What can I say? The node shrink side of things, well, I think this is possibly one of the reasons why the existing Switch 2 processor is on Samsung 8nm to begin with. We can assume that it's there for economic reasons, that Nintendo would have got a good deal from Samsung on making this chip on a production line that's probably not making so many chips anymore. But what this does also mean is that further on down the line, I think it took 3 years on the original Switch, you've got a node shrink in hand, so to speak. And at that point, that node should, in theory, be much cheaper than it is today. So, you could be looking at a 4nm chip, which, a lot of people wanted the first generation Switch to be running on. And 4nm versus Samsung 8nm, which is effectively a 10nm node in all but name, you're going to be seeing, similar to what we saw with Switch 1, a gigantic increase in battery life, which seems to be, potentially a weakness for the current model. So, yeah, I mean, I suspect that's probably what is going to happen. And, Nintendo sort of obviously picks and chooses their battles in terms of, where they're going to be spending their money. And obviously the HDR 120 hertz screen was something where they've decided to make an investment versus the original. But the Node is, a cost-effective one as opposed to a fantastically performant one. I don't know what you think about this, Oliver.
Yeah, I would echo your comments there. I think that they would probably be looking at a 5nm class node, and that would include 4nm nodes as well. That's kind of a broad term for a set of process technologies that are quite similar there. And I think that the battery life improvements would be key, like Rich mentioned. The Switch 2 has a lower bound battery life figure of 2 hours. The Switch 1 had a lower bound battery life figure of, I think, about 2.5 hours. So it was a little bit more than the Switch 2 unit there, even though the Switch 2 has a larger battery. That is certainly a concern. And obviously the revised Switch units have much higher battery figures still, have 4 hours, 4.5 hours minimum battery life, something in that range for like a Switch OLED, for instance, which has the 16nm revision of the Marico of the X1 chip in the original Switch there. But I also think another important thing, probably, especially with like a Switch Lite unit, would be physically making that chip smaller, because 200 millimeters squared in the context of a portable device, of a handheld device, it's actually a pretty significant amount of space. That's space where you can't fit, for instance, more battery capacity, which is obviously going to be quite crucial for a device like that, for a Switch Lite. So I would expect that before we see a Switch 2 Lite console, assuming one arrives, there will be a shrink. And before we see probably an OLED model as well, we'd probably also see a shrink, because I think Nintendo would like to bundle up all their key kind of technologies to really sell you a complete and good upgrade unit for the Switch 2. Again, assuming they make one. They made a couple last generation. They can probably make a couple this generation as well. In terms of upgrades for an OLED model, I wouldn't really think of quality of life improvements so much as I just really want to see a really good HDR panel. I want something that can do 1000 nits or higher peak brightness, ideally brighter, because we're talking about, years of advancements in HDR displays, and already the Switch OLED, or already the Steam Deck OLED, can reach 1000 nits in highlights and HDR content. So I'd really hope for like a class-leading, really high-quality HDR experience that is taking the best in OLED televisions, basically, and putting it in the palm of your hand alongside that 120 hertz and VRR support that is going to probably be pretty critical for Switch 2 mobile gaming.
Yeah, okay. So Alex, about this new Nintendo console that you've never seen and only have tangential interest in, what do you think the next one's going to look like?
Well, It's gonna be that. I mean, were there any other like with the Switch One OLED? Was there anything else about it other than the screen that was really different?
Not really. You had a better kickstand.
Well, this time they emphasized a new, thicker kickstand, if you remember. So they don't have anything to do there. There's no vertical stand potentiality like my wonderful PS5 Pro here. I mean, I think if it's just a handheld device, and if I were playing handheld device, for me, power is so much less of a concern as battery life. So I would just want doubling of battery life in any way.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have a boost mode, but we always say that, and it never happens. For Nintendo devices. I was just thinking back to the Switch 2 battery life that's been mooted here, approximately 2 to 6.5 hours. For 6.5 hours, that means that the total system power draw is going to be 3.1 watts. So I really do want to see what games are getting 6.5 hours of battery life on there. I mean, is the screen on, like, is the speakers off? Screen on minimum brightness? I'd love to see a sort of 6.5 hour challenge. What does it take to actually get the Switch 2 to run in handheld mode for 6 hours? What games? Yeah, that's going to be quite the thing. 3.1 watts is the calculation there, based on basically a 20 watt hour battery. That's kind of nuts.